You know how humanity has this weird reputation across the galaxy for being completely insane when it comes to caring for dangerous animals? Well, let me tell you about the day that little quirk of ours saved an entire space station, caught a smuggling ring, and somehow got me promoted to head of interspecies child care. Yeah, that's apparently a real position now. I'm Captain Jack Roundhouse Jackie, to my friends and enemies if they're lucky enough to survive. A title that, for reasons I will never fully understand, includes half the dangerous predator species in the galaxy. Currently, I'm stationed as the human diplomatic liaison on Space Station Omega-7, tasked with keeping the peace between 17 sapient species and ensuring that nobody gets eaten during trade negotiations. It's basically like being a kindergarten teacher, except the kids are all ambassadors who can vote on whether or not to destroy your home planet. It was just another Tuesday morning. Yes, we still call it Tuesday, even though we're in space. Humans are stubborn that way. That morning, I was in the middle of dealing with what I hoped would be a routine diplomatic squabble involving some reliant trade tariffs when I got the kind of message that makes you seriously consider calling in sick for the day. Captain Roundhouse, we have a situation at Docking Bay 3. The, Nexus Predators are here. If you've never seen a Nexus Predator, let me paint a picture for you. Imagine a velociraptor had a baby with a tiger, and that baby grew up bench-pressing rhinoceroses. They stand about 9 feet tall, covered in armored scales, and have teeth that could make a great white shark feel completely inadequate. They're predators, but they also happen to be one of the most sophisticated civilizations in the galaxy. Apparently, being apex predators gives you a lot of free time to develop advanced physics when you don't have to worry about being eaten. Tell me they're not hungry, I said, speed-walking toward the docking bay. The security officer's nervous laugh only made it worse. They say they need to speak with you specifically, something about cubs. I froze mid-stride, causing a very confused glow bond to squish itself against the wall to avoid me. "Sorry, Gary," I called out to the embarrassed slug-like alien before turning back to my comm. "Did you just say cubs? As in baby Nexus predators? As in multiple tiny versions of the galaxy's most efficient killing machines?" "Affirmative. 3 of them. And Captain, they're asking for human assistance." I felt a cold wave of dread wash over me as the docking bay doors hissed open. And then, I saw them. 2 adult Nexus predators flanked by 3 smaller versions of themselves. If there's one thing about Nexus cubs that will haunt your nightmares, it's their play fighting. Picture a wrestling match, but with more teeth, more claws, and an impressive amount of killing potential. "Ambassador Kirk," I said, bowing slightly because when something can eat you in one bite, you learn to be polite. "What can humanity do for the Nexus Confederation today?" KRK's mate, who I couldn't pronounce without risking a serious tongue injury, stepped forward, his sharp gaze focused on me. "We have an emergency summit regarding the reliant trade dispute. All Nexus representatives are required. We need—" There was a pause as the translation matrix searched for the words. "We need a babysitter." And that's how I ended up as the designated babysitter for 3 of the galaxy's most lethal creatures, at least until I could figure out how to not get eaten in the process. You might think I'm joking, but when you're standing in front of 3 apex predator cubs, you don't laugh. You don't even breathe. The real kicker? These predators weren't just trustful enough to ask for a babysitter, they were asking humans. Kirk continued. "Your species has a remarkable history of nurturing dangerous offspring." I mentally face-palmed. Of course they did. Humanity's reputation as the galaxy's unpaid, unqualified babysitters was legendary. It all started about 30 years ago when a Drachnid queen had an emergency diplomatic meeting during hatching season. The only available help? A human zoologist who had spent his career rehabilitating Kodo dragons. The guy managed to keep 40 baby drachnids alive and happy for 3 days, armed with nothing but a spray bottle, some laser pointers, and a whole lot of patience. The cubs had already started play fighting. Kevin, the one with the most energy and apparently the most self-destructive tendencies, was already scaling the docking bay's carbon fiber support beams. I could only shake my head. If this didn't kill me, it was going to be a legendary disaster. "I'll help Kevin down," I muttered, turning to the cubs. A little bribery worked wonders with these guys. Turns out, synthesized salmon was a universal favorite among apex predators. Kirk's mate gave me a nod, as if they understood this human tactic too well. "Your species has that peculiar trait of treating all young as if they were your own." "You mean we're suckers for anything baby-shaped?" I muttered, though I had a sinking feeling that I was already in way over my head. The station AI chose this exact moment to remind everyone of my extensive qualifications. Attention, all species. According to station records, Captain Roundhouse has previously provided emergency care for 17 Venusian acid spitters, 1 clutch of magnetar worms, 4 quantum pythons, and 1 particularly angry house cat. I winced. The house cat incident had not gone as planned. And then my assistant Bob, known for memorizing every station safety protocol, chimed in. "Jackie, please tell me we're not setting up an impromptu daycare for apex predator cubs." "Okay, I won't tell you that," I said, a bit too cheerfully. "I'll just mention that we're having some very special guests in Recreation Module 7, and you might want to bring every reinforced titanium toy from the diplomatic gift vault." Bob's tone was a mix of exasperation and resignation. "I'm bringing them. But if this ends with us being eaten, I'm holding you personally responsible." The stage was set. The cubs were here. And somehow, I was the one tasked with keeping them entertained until their parents were done with their trade summit. Recreation Module 7 had been converted into what I hoped was a predator-proof playpen. I used that term loosely. The truth was, with 3 Nexus cubs on the loose, there was no such thing as predator-proof. I had requisitioned every piece of reinforced equipment the station could provide, set up multiple redundant containment fields, and even installed a makeshift ball pit made out of decommissioned sensor spheres. Bob's voice crackled through the comm unit, sounding even more defeated than usual. "Okay, let's review. We've got emergency force fields, backup power supplies, 3 types of environmental controls, and enough enrichment activities to keep a battalion of predator cubs entertained. And we're still going to die, right?" I chuckled nervously, adjusting the reinforced play sphere in my hand. "Probably not. I mean, we've been through worse. Remember the time we had to babysit the Venusian acid spitters?" Bob didn't even respond to that. Instead, I heard the sound of his boots on the floor as he came in to join me. Bob was a pro when it came to safety protocols, but even he was visibly rattled by the idea of babysitting these monsters. The 3 cubs were already in full exploratory mode. Kevin, the hyperactive one, was using my shoulders as a launching pad to leap at his siblings, which was surprisingly endearing, considering that a mere misstep could easily lead to me being crushed. Snap, who had an uncanny ability to break everything in sight, was currently testing the structural integrity of every piece of equipment with his claws. Click, click, the quiet one, was analyzing everything with an intensity that made me think he might be plotting some grand scheme involving the station's entire infrastructure. Jackie," Bob said, his voice strained. "They're already testing the gravity generator. Do you think we should be worried?" I glanced over to see Kevin clinging to the edge of the gravity generator like it was the best toy ever. "Nah, he's just exploring," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "But, maybe just make sure the backup systems are running, just in case." Bob nodded and immediately pulled out his data pad, checking the system's readings. As he did, I noticed the cubs' parents, Ambassador Kirk and her mate, watching from a distance, their eyes following their offspring's every move with an almost absurd level of attention. They seemed oddly calm about the whole thing, like this was a regular Tuesday for them, too. I waved at them, offering a smile that was probably too forced to be considered polite. "Your cubs are, very active." Kirk's mate clicked his jaw in response, clearly amused by my attempt to maintain some semblance of composure. "They are curious. And we trust you, Captain. Your species has a unique relationship with dangerous young. Your kind has learned to keep even the most ferocious creatures entertained." I tried not to feel like I was about to pass out. It's just a thing we do. As I turned back to the cubs, I could feel the sweat on the back of my neck. They were all so adorable, in a please don't eat me kind of way. Kevin, clearly bored with the current state of affairs, had found his next target, me. He launched himself from my shoulders with terrifying accuracy, landing square on top of my head with a loud thud. "Okay, buddy, let's not do that," I said, gently prying his claws out of my hair. Bob, who had been watching from a safe distance, raised an eyebrow. "You know, I don't think we signed up for this when they told us we'd be doing diplomatic work." "Yeah, well," I sighed. "Life on Omega-7 is never boring." That was when I realized something truly horrifying. The cubs were getting bored, and if there's one thing worse than a bored predator, it's a bored predator with too much energy. Kevin was busy bouncing off the walls, and Snap had begun making a game out of seeing how far he could push a maintenance droid before it malfunctioned. Click, on the other hand, had been entirely too quiet, which was exactly what you didn't want when it came to apex predators. I watched as he slowly advanced toward one of the environmental control units, his eyes narrowing as he studied it with unblinking focus. My heart sank. This wasn't just any toy. This was the kind of equipment that would shut down life support if tampered with. "Hey, click, no!" I said, rushing forward to intercept him. But of course it was already too late. With a single swipe of his claw, Click had triggered the unit's emergency override. Jackie?" Bob's voice was barely audible over the growing chaos. "The AI's reporting a power fluctuation in Module 7. What did you do this time?" I shot Bob a glare, but the truth was, the cubs had turned the entire module into a live demonstration of why the galaxy considered them the most dangerous creatures in existence. "Don't worry," I said, giving Click an exaggerated wink. "It's just a little system hiccup, nothing we can't handle." And that's when the power completely went out. The station's lights flickered and then died, plunging the entire module into darkness, with only the emergency red lights illuminating the cubs, who, blessedly, did not seem to care about the power failure in the slightest. They just kept playing, only now their games involved pretending to fall off high places and then catching themselves at the last second. It was terrifying and adorable, which was honestly starting to feel like a theme. Bob and I stood there frozen for a moment as the cubs darted around us, chasing shadows and testing the limits of every single safety feature we had set up. "Right," Bob said, after what felt like an eternity. "We're definitely going to die, aren't we?" "No," I said, taking a deep breath. "We're going to survive this. We've survived worse." In that moment, I realized something profound about humanity. It wasn't just that we were stubborn or unreasonably optimistic. No, we were survivalists. And somehow, despite the chaos, I had a feeling we were going to come out of this with a great story, a lot of property damage, and possibly a new job title. And hey, if we somehow managed to babysit 3 apex predators without getting eaten, maybe, just maybe, this would be the most successful diplomatic mission ever. But that didn't mean I wasn't praying for the power to come back on soon. You'd think that after years of managing high-risk diplomatic situations, I'd be used to things going horribly wrong in the most dramatic ways. But nothing quite prepared me for the chaos that unfolded when the cubs, who were at the moment having a blast testing every safety feature in Recreation Module 7, decided to inadvertently bring down the entire station's security protocols. The lights were still flickering ominously, and the emergency sirens had begun to wail in the background, but strangely enough, I felt a little calmer. I turned to Bob, who was checking his datapad with growing panic. You know, he said, when I signed up for this job, I didn't think babysitting apex predator cubs would be part of the job description. Yeah, me neither, I said, trying to remain upbeat. But hey, look at it this way. We're making history. Not many people can say they babysat 3 apex predators and still walked away with all their limbs intact. Bob didn't respond. He was too busy monitoring the status of the emergency protocols. Meanwhile, the cubs had gathered around an old maintenance droid and were trying to figure out how to make it do somersaults. Kevin, of course, was already jumping on top of the droid as if it was the perfect springboard. But just as I thought we were starting to get a handle on the situation, the universe, as usual, decided it wasn't done having fun with me yet. From the far corner of the module, I heard the unmistakable sound of alarms, along with the frantic voice of a very terrified Globan ambassador. "Captain, please tell me this isn't happening." I turned to see a few dozen ambassadors from various species pressed up against the viewing windows, looking into the playpen with a mixture of fascination and horror. "What's the issue?" I asked, approaching the Globan, whose eye stalks were trembling as he pointed at the cubs. They're too cute. The cubs are adorable, but they're destroying everything," he exclaimed, his voice high-pitched with distress. I blinked. "They're not destroying everything, they're just exploring, in a very enthusiastic way." Before I could say anything else, I heard Bob's voice crackling through the comm. "Jackie, you need to see this, now!" I rushed over to him and saw exactly what had caused the emergency. Kevin, in his usual overzealous way, had somehow found his way to the station's snack supply crates. And of course, he wasn't just sniffing around. He was actively tearing into the crates as if they were the greatest treasure he had ever found. "Bob, are those the emergency rations?" I asked, my voice dripping with dread. "Yes," Bob said flatly. "Yes, they are. And if I'm not mistaken, the smell is attracting every other species on the station." Sure enough, I could see other ambassadors shifting nervously as the cubs continued to gorge themselves on the contents of the crates. Kevin, Snap Snap, and Click Click were now elbow-deep in what appeared to be a mix of high-calorie protein snacks and luxurious treats from various species. I watched in horror as Kevin enthusiastically crunched into a crate of dried Venusian eggs, a delicacy that cost more than most spacefaring ships. "Hey, no!" I shouted, rushing toward them. "Those aren't toys!" Click Click gave me an inquisitive glance, but did not stop tearing apart the crate. Apparently, toys had a very different meaning to them. I tried gently pulling him away, but the little guy's claws were stronger than I expected, and I got a few scratches as a result. I turned to Bob. "We need to stop them before the station's snack supply is gone, or worse, we end up with a diplomatic crisis over stolen Venusian eggs." "I think we're already in the middle of a diplomatic crisis," Bob said, holding up his datapad, which was flashing with multiple incoming messages from the ambassadors. "They're already starting to file complaints." "Well," I said, taking a deep breath, "we can't have that. Time for Plan B." And by Plan B, I meant bribing the cubs with something they couldn't resist. The problem was, we were running low on synthesized salmon, which was their favorite snack, and I wasn't sure what else would do the trick. In a moment of desperation, I grabbed a random object, a training ball made of reinforced titanium, and tossed it across the room. Kevin, predictably, went after it like a flash of lightning. I let out a relieved sigh as the cubs momentarily abandoned the ransacked crates and chased the ball, leaving the mess behind. I turned to Bob. "That'll work for a little while, but we need to find a more permanent solution." Bob nodded grimly. "We're not out of the woods yet, Jackie. Remember, we're still dealing with apex predators. One slip-up, and we could end up with a diplomatic incident so big, the Galactic Council will start discussing universal peace treaties just to avoid dealing with the aftermath." "Yeah," I said, wiping the sweat from my brow, "but I think the cubs just saved us from a much worse crisis. They're the best detectives we've got right now." Before Bob could respond, a new sound, one I wasn't expecting, echoed through the module. It was the unmistakable hiss of a door opening and then a series of clattering sounds. The cubs perked up, looking around. And that's when I realized the worst part of all this. The cubs weren't just playing. They were actively hunting. I dashed forward, but it was already too late. The three cubs had turned their attention to something new, a group of smuggling operatives trying to sneak through the station's lower cargo bays. These weren't just any smugglers. They were the kind of individuals who thought they could get away with just about anything, until they found themselves surrounded by three very hungry, very smart Nexus cubs. "Bob, get security down here!" I shouted, already watching the cubs start herding the smugglers into a corner. "On it," Bob said, already pulling up the security protocols. The smugglers, realizing they had nowhere to go, tried to make a run for it. But Kevin was too fast, snapping his jaws close to their heels. Snap, snap, and click, click worked in perfect coordination, blocking every exit. The smugglers backed into a maintenance tunnel trying to hide, but it didn't matter. The cubs were relentless, their training instincts kicking in as they moved like a well-oiled machine. I couldn't help but laugh, despite everything. I guess our little babysitting job just turned into a rescue mission, huh? Bob didn't laugh. I'm not sure the Galactic Council is going to see it that way. But I wasn't concerned about that. For once, I wasn't worried about the paperwork or the political fallout. I was watching three Nexus cubs doing what they were born to do: hunt, protect, and keep order. In the end, I wasn't just babysitting. I was witnessing the galaxy's most dangerous young predators doing what they were meant to do: save the day. The smugglers didn't stand a chance. Not against the cubs, anyway. After they'd been cornered and prevented from making any more escape attempts, they gave up pretty quickly. I watched, slightly in awe, as Kevin, who seemed to be the most excitable of the three, chomped down on their gear, his jaw not far from snapping through a critical component of their tech. Snap, snap, and click, click were staying calm and silent, almost like they were waiting for instructions. In their eyes, I saw an eerie kind of intelligence, as if they were aware of the importance of what they were doing. I activated my comm unit and signaled security. "We've got a situation in Maintenance Tunnel 14C. 3 smugglers caught by some very enthusiastic cubs. Bring treats, the good ones." Bob's voice crackled back immediately. "Understood. But remind me again, Jackie, why are the cubs the ones apprehending smugglers instead of us? Shouldn't we be doing the whole law enforcement thing?" I couldn't help but smile. "Bob, it's like I've always said. Never underestimate the power of a good playdate." It wasn't long before station security arrived in full force. Officers in reinforced exosuits advanced cautiously, but they weren't even close to being the first ones on the scene. The cubs, with all the self-assurance of a top-tier police unit, had already taken control. They were standing guard around the smugglers who, surprisingly, were no longer trying to escape. In fact, they were downright cooperative at this point. "Good work, Captain," the security chief said, inspecting the scene and giving the cubs a hesitant thumbs up. "I've never seen such efficient law enforcement." I couldn't help but chuckle. "Yeah, they're pretty good. Who knew that playing fetch could lead to this?" She smiled, though it was a little strained. "I think we're all starting to realize just how good they are. The Galactic Council is going to have a lot to say about this." I didn't know if that was meant to sound reassuring, but I wasn't exactly worried. The smugglers were caught, the cubs were still doing their thing, and everything seemed to be going according to plan. At least, until one of the smugglers, apparently trying to make a last-ditch effort to escape, reached for a hidden weapon in his pocket. "Don't move!" he shouted. "We're not going down without a fight!" Before I could react, Kevin, quick as ever, closed the distance and gently bit through the man's pocket, retrieving the weapon with surgical precision. He didn't bite the man's arm, mind you, just the pocket. It was a move that spoke volumes about the cub's control. Fun fact, I said casually to the security team. The cubs are incredibly well trained. They just know where to bite. The smugglers, now completely deflated, raised their hands in surrender. All right, one of them grumbled. You got us. We were hired to sabotage the summit. Just don't let those monsters anywhere near us. I shot them an amused look. They're not monsters, I said. They're just extremely enthusiastic. The cubs, proving once again they were way more capable than I was prepared to handle, kept their eyes on the smugglers. But now they seemed more interested in playing with the ball they'd left rolling across the floor. The security chief gave me a wry smile. You might just have to turn this into a new security program. Cubs for the Galactic Police Force. I think there's a market for that. Definitely, I agreed. But, I'd like to see the paperwork for that one. As the security team took control of the smugglers and began the process of securing the area, I watched the cubs for a moment, considering just how much my life had changed in the last few hours. What started as an ordinary diplomatic mission had turned into the most chaotic, unexpected, and thrilling day I'd ever experienced. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was all just the beginning. Later that evening, after the smugglers were safely detained and the emergency situation was wrapped up, I found myself alone in Recreation Module 7, once again surrounded by the cubs. The place looked like a tornado had passed through it, chewed up crates, broken toys, and the occasional piece of tech scattered about. But I wasn't upset. Honestly, I had no idea what I expected when I signed up for this job, but it sure wasn't babysitting apex predators. And yet, here I was. Kirk and her mate arrived to retrieve their cubs, but not before giving me a small gift, a strange crystal-like token, glinting with colors that seemed to shimmer in every direction. "This is for your efforts," Kirk said, her voice almost serene as she handed it over. "It's a symbol of trust from the Nexus Confederation. We will never forget your help." I took the token with a smile, feeling both honored and slightly overwhelmed. "Thank you, Ambassador, but I'm not sure I deserve this." Her mate clicked his jaws, an amused sound that felt like a chuckle. "You have earned it, Captain Roundhouse, and you may soon find yourself playing an important role in the future of galactic diplomacy." I blinked, not sure if this was a joke or a serious statement. "Really?" Kirk nodded. "Yes. Your species' reputation has spread far and wide, and we have seen firsthand how you handle our young. It is remarkable." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded. "I'll keep that in mind." As the cubs bounded excitedly around me, bidding their goodbyes, Kirk's mate added, "There are many species in the galaxy that have come to rely on your kind. Perhaps it is time that we formalize humanity's role in caring for dangerous young." I turned to look at Bob, who had been watching quietly from the back of the room. He raised an eyebrow, clearly thinking the same thing I was. "Did they just suggest we become official babysitters for the galaxy?" I asked, only half joking. "I think they did," Bob replied dryly. "I don't know whether to be horrified or proud." The cubs finally left, but not before making one last demonstration of their skills by performing an intricate patrol formation in front of their parents. It was clear they were more than just cute faces and adorable antics. These cubs had potential, and the universe had already started to take notice. As the Nexus Predators boarded their ship, Clark gave me one final, approving look. "You will see," she said softly. "This is just the beginning." I didn't fully understand what she meant, but one thing was for sure. The galaxy was about to look at humanity in a whole new light. And for once, it wasn't because of our military might or technological superiority. It was because of our insane ability to look at the most dangerous creatures in the universe and say, "Who's a good boy?" The days following the Nexus Cubs' diplomatic debut passed in a blur of meetings, debriefings, and negotiations. Somehow, I had gone from being the captain of a diplomatic team on a space station to the unofficial handler of some of the galaxy's most dangerous young creatures. Official documentation was still being processed, but the idea of humanity becoming the go-to species for apex predator childcare was gaining traction fast. Bob and I spent the next few days trying to manage our new responsibilities. I had to reorganize my entire schedule to include cub management as an official job duty. It wasn't just about babysitting anymore. It was about fostering interspecies relationships through an entirely new lens, one where humans took on the delicate role of nurturing the galaxy's most volatile younglings. At first, I had no idea how to handle the sudden attention. Ambassadors from various species started calling me, offering words of congratulations or requests for help. It was a weird feeling being thrust into the spotlight like this. I had never considered myself much of a diplomat. I was more of a get-the-job-done kind of person. But now humanity's reputation was shifting. We were no longer the species with the reputation for unpredictable chaos. Instead, we were becoming known for our ability to connect with, understand, and care for even the most terrifying young predators. But as the weeks passed, I started to feel more comfortable in my new role. Bob and I made adjustments to the recreation module. With the growing number of young creatures being sent our way for training and care, we had to upgrade everything. The reinforced titanium toys were no longer just for fun. They had become vital pieces of equipment to keep the cubs entertained without causing too much damage. We also started implementing enrichment programs, which I'd never even heard of before but quickly learned to manage. It was one of those days, midway through the second month of our new role, that I got a call from the Galactic Council. They wanted to establish a formal human juvenile management program in partnership with Omega-7, where I'd be the primary ambassador and overseer of the Extreme Cubs Daycare. I laughed when I got the call. The very idea of it still seemed completely absurd, but then again, that was humanity's charm, right? We were absurd in all the best ways. 2 weeks later, I was sitting in a grand council chamber on Omega-7, facing a holographic array of ambassadors from every corner of the galaxy. As I looked around the room, I realized just how much our little babysitting experiment had grown. What was once an impromptu gig had transformed into an official role for humanity. I was there to speak on behalf of the human race and to prove that we had a unique place in the galactic community. The Human Juvenile Management Program, I began, my voice steady, is more than just a daycare service. It's an opportunity for interspecies collaboration. It's about understanding the complexities of raising young, especially those of dangerous species, and offering our expertise in nurturing and training the next generation of leaders. It's a testament to humanity's resilience, patience, and capacity for growth. We are, as always, willing to take on the unexpected and turn it into something meaningful. The room was silent for a long moment. Then Ambassador Kirk, the same one whose cubs had started this whole mess, clicked her secondary jaws and spoke, her voice carrying an unmistakable note of pride. "You speak the truth, Captain Roundhouse," she said. "Humanity has demonstrated an extraordinary level of understanding, patience, and wisdom with our young. You have taken the responsibility we offered and transformed it into something greater than we could have imagined." I nodded, glancing over at Bob, who was standing at the back of the room with a bemused expression. I knew he'd be just as skeptical as I was, but we had made it work. "You were right," Bob whispered to me when the meeting finally ended. "Who would have thought this would actually turn into something real?" I couldn't help but laugh. You never know what's going to happen when you start chasing after dangerous predator cubs. As I left the chamber, I realized something. This was exactly where humanity belonged. Not at the top of the food chain, not through brute force or sheer military might. No, we had carved out our place by doing what we always do best, by being stubbornly compassionate, impossibly resilient, and just a little bit insane. And as the rest of the galaxy watched, we continued to redefine what it meant to be a part of something greater than ourselves. In a universe filled with war, politics, and vast interstellar tensions, it turned out that the key to peace wasn't force, but understanding. And maybe, just maybe, it was because we had a strange talent for taking the most dangerous creatures in the galaxy, looking them in the eye and saying, "Who's a good boy?" Epilogue. The future of extreme cubs. It wasn't long before the first official Extreme Cubs daycare program opened its doors. Humans became the caretakers for juvenile predators from every corner of the galaxy, offering everything from education on interspecies relations to teaching cubs how to navigate complex social dynamics without starting a war. Ambassadors from every species began to arrive with their young, each hoping to learn from humanity's unique approach to childcare. And as we continued to grow and expand the program, one thing became clear. The universe might be an unpredictable place, but humanity's place in it had just been solidified. The day we became the galaxy's official babysitters was the day we discovered that, no matter how crazy or dangerous the universe got, there would always be room for us to care, nurture, and guide, no matter how terrifying the creatures were. And I couldn't be prouder. This concludes our story, with humanity taking its rightful place in the galaxy not through power, but through its unique approach to understanding and caring for the most dangerous young creatures. The job may have started with chaos, but it ended with the creation of a new legacy, a legacy that proved that sometimes the most unpredictable paths lead to the greatest rewards.